Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast, the podcast for moms who know that when they take care of themselves, they can take better care of everyone else. Today is an episode of Couples Who Know, and we're going to start off. James is going to share an experience he had recently at work. So James, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, glad to. I was thinking about all of you out there, and as I had a long drive ahead of me, I was getting ready to go to the Sequoias where we needed to take a look at this camp. This is an outdoor camp where it is used usually for young women of our church. And we had to go up there to make some big decisions. And it was really interesting during this drive, thinking about what we were doing and then there and then on the way back. And I'll try to sum all that up for you. So like I said, we had to make some big decisions, and the decisions were regarding this lodge, that the focal point of the camp. And we had to decide if we were going to shut it down. And we're in the summertime here, coming up on when all these camps are happening. So we went up to this camp with a few questions in mind, if we were going to keep it open or if we could salvage it or what we could do. And here the key players that we invited up, myself, a regional manager, another regional manager, and we had two structural engineers, one from our organization and a third-party structural engineer, and a facility manager and a project manager. So all these people up here are taking a look at this to make sure that it's safe or what we're going to need to do. So anyway, we went up there and the lodge was in really bad disrepair. We were the first ones up there. It was a big snow year for us here, more than usual. Our snow loads were pretty heavy on the roofs at camp. And so when we went up there, we found that a dormer on top of the lodge had completely been destroyed by the snow.
What's a dormer?
Oh, okay. So picture like a little dollhouse with a little pitch to it on top with the window looking out, the little light that you see. So that's a dormer.
Okay. I did not know that word.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway. So this dormer had almost fallen off the roof. It was hanging from the roof. And there were a lot of other structural problems with the camp. So you guys are probably thinking, what is the point of all this? Well, getting together with all of these players, we were able to come to some really important decisions. And we knew right away that it was not safe to sleep upstairs. And as we were going through, the structural engineers were pointing things out, and I was pointing things out to keep in mind with, the county regulations and all the codes that go along with that. And the facility manager had other things in mind. And the project manager was thinking more about how we'd do permitting. And so there was all these things to take into consideration. And I was just thinking, wow, this is so much like marriage, this great collaboration with others. And that's what I was excited to think about on the way home and then talk to Chanel about. And do you remember kind of what I was talking about when I came home? I was all excited about, wow, this big, huge collaboration. And this is what we did. And we came up with all these things. It was just exciting for me. And we talked a little bit about how it related to marriage.
For sure. So I know one of the things that we had talked about is that in marriage, it's so helpful to bounce ideas off of each other and to really, this wasn't just one guy going in and making all these decisions, but it was this collaboration of different people sharing their different ideas and coming with their different areas of expertise. And then because of that, you came up with a way better solution. And so we had talked about that's one thing in marriage that you can do is, to make better decisions is really get together and not have one of you, making all the decisions, but both of you coming in together and sharing your ideas and really building, and that synergy and that building on each other's ideas. You're going to come up with something much better than you ever would alone, because one of you has an idea and then that builds on it. You keep building on each other's ideas to come up with something even better.
And that's exactly what happened. And, I was really careful in putting this together because that's a lot of resources, right? That's a lot of time. That's a lot of money to get all these people together. But it's so hard to do it on your own. And even to have me and just the person that I was responsible for going over and looking at it, we knew that we needed help and we needed other people's ideas. And it was so interesting because I thought, just get one structural engineer up there, but to hear them bouncing ideas off each other. And then the contractor was there. I don't think I mentioned that. The contractor was another key player, the one that was going to be doing these fixes. And he was saying, guys, this to the structural engineers, it was really funny to hear them talking. Like they're coming up with all these crazy fixes, right? And the contractor's like, hold on, guys. Like, how am I going to do this? How is this going to be put into action? And then he came up with some ideas, and they said, well, that won't exactly work because you need to think of this component over here. And, they came to an agreement what would work. And then the contractor said, yeah, that will work. And we said, yeah, we can work that in with the county too. And so we all had these different hats on, and we all played a really vital role in making this decision for this camp. By the way, we came up with a list. We were there for a long time. We came up with a list of urgent repairs to get it open up to where the campers can be in there in the 2 weeks that the camp was going to open. So we were really happy about that, excited about that. And then we came up with some long-term repairs. And then we came up with a master plan for the camp as a whole. And so it was just exciting that all happened. And I'm not even doing it justice of this meeting and how excited I was and when I came home to talk to Chanel about it. But if you can just picture that for your marriage and having this plan, what you're going to do, that's what was exciting. And I think that's what I was trying to relate to Chanel. And then when we talked about it, we were thinking some other ideas that we wanted to share with you.
Yeah, so one of the things we had talked about is that all these different people had different opinions, and obviously they came up with one plan and one, final direction of how they were going to go. But something that's really interesting in this piece is the thought that all these different people with their different perspectives had different ideas. And we were thinking about, with marriage, you get a lot of different advice and you hear a lot of different people's opinions and, the way you should do things in a marriage. And really, some things are going to work for you and your marriage. Some advice is going to work for you, but some really isn't. And so it's this whole idea of understanding what you need in the moment. And like James was just saying, what's going to work in the short term and then what you kind of need to build on for the long term. So coming up with this plan and really having an understanding of what your marriage needs at that time and kind of knowing who to listen to.
I like what you said about, there's going to be different ideas. There's so much advice out there. And that was just like the contractor listening to the two structural engineers. Like, that's not going to work. I don't see it going that way. And I think that's true in marriage. There is a lot of great advice out there, but sometimes you're going to think, I know my spouse well enough to know that I don't think that's the best approach. So that's what I love about all the information that's out there, and hopefully you glean a lot from these podcasts that we share. Hey, you know what? That's something that I can really implement, and I know I can make that work. And that's where you start to see progress. So super exciting to me.
Yeah. So, and it just along those lines is, we share things on this podcast that have worked for us. And hope that they're going to work for others, and things that we've studied, things that we've learned in our training, which I don't know if we've ever shared on here. So when we were first married, have we shared this before?
I don't know that we have.
We were a host couple for marriage retreats, and we got to go to these awesome marriage retreats I don't know, every month or couple weeks, and we would spend the whole weekend learning about marriage and having this training about marriage, and it was so awesome. But anyway, so we, the things that we are teaching and sharing with you are things that we put into practice and things that we've learned there and at other places. But really, it comes down to, what is going to work for you. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is your support team, because we all have, like James was talking about, all these people that came together to work on this building. We all have different supports in our marriage. And so one of those that came to mind for me is our parents. Hopefully, our parents have our best interest in mind and can kind of see different things. And as I was thinking about how our parents are a support to us in marriage, one thing that I thought of is, for us, and if we have a disagreement, I don't hurry and call my mom. I don't call my dad. I don't tell my parents about it. That is not exactly the supporting role that I need from them. I mostly want to see how they've done things and learn from their example, and see what's worked for them and what hasn't, and ask them different questions and get feedback in that way. I think that one thing with parents that can be tricky is if you are going to your parents and, telling them too much, kind of spilling the beans. Well, your parents are probably always going to,
side with you.
Side with you, right? Yeah, rather than their in-law. I mean, often I think that they're hearing it from their child, and I think it's easy to side with their child. And so sometimes you can kind of drive a wedge between your spouse and your parents.
I've really appreciated that you have not done that in our marriage. And because those are obviously people, your in-laws, that you want to make a good impression for. And obviously your spouse is going to know a lot of things about you, and if they're going to share all the bad stuff with your parents, or with their parents rather, it's going to really reflect negatively. So I appreciate that if we have a disagreement, that it's not automatically Chanel calling her mom or dad. Oh my gosh, can you believe you did this? And of course you can talk to your parents and let them know what's going on. I just appreciate not being cast in a bad light, is what I'll say. And I've tried to do that with my marriage, or with my parents as well in our marriage, and always saying good things about my spouse and learning from them. Of course, your parents have had differences too, but I really like that. They're a huge resource, and they have a lot of wisdom.
Yeah. So I think for that one, for parents, just learning from them. And if your parents have not had a really, successful marriage, or whatever the case may be, there's still things to learn from that too. Totally. And to listen to your parents and to have those conversations can be really valuable. Both the conversations and then just watching and observing and seeing. And I know, one thing that my parents have always set a good example about is weekly date nights. That's really important to them, even now, and when I was growing up. And so I saw that in action and knew that that was something important for our marriage. So definitely that example piece comes from the parents.
Right. One other one I was thinking about is friends. Friends are so important. And same thing with not casting your spouse in a bad light to your parents. I think that can apply to your friends as well. We all have close friends, and we share things with them. And I think the way that you can get information from them doesn't always have to necessarily be like, oh, my spouse did this, and can you believe how horrible they are? Because that's kind of natural a lot of times, is when you're feeling hurt, like, hey, agree with me that my spouse is terrible. And I think if you can train yourself to not do that, you'll learn even more by just, you can discuss what's going on, of course, with your friends, maybe ask them their opinion on what they would do, or just explain the situation. But it's important to have that feedback and that sounding board. I've so appreciated being able to talk to close friends about what's worked for them in their marriage, or if I'm struggling with a particular issue, hey, have you run into this before? Not, oh my goodness, my wife is so awful, and fill in the blank.
Yeah, I agree with friends. You definitely have to have that same, you have to be careful. And I think it's really important to, with your friends, we're talking about support in marriage here, to have friends who are supportive of marriage in general and who support your marriage. If you have a friend who, if you say something to them and they're instantly going to husband bashing, then that's probably not the friend that you want to talk to about those things, because that's not supportive to your marriage. That's not a helpful conversation. You want any conversation to be helpful to your marriage, to be supportive to your marriage. If it's something that's just making you feel justified in, your anger, or just feeling like, oh, my husband is wrong in this situation, that kind of is feeding the fire and not really helping to support the marriage. Now, I will say, of course, there are times that there are heartbreaking things that people go through, and sometimes they do need to talk to someone. But I would say to be really careful about choosing who that someone is. And maybe it's not a friend. Maybe it's someone else.
It is. It can be, I should say. And maybe it is a professional.
Right.
Maybe you're talking to a certified therapist, or someone that is licensed that can really help you. I think that's something that's important to think about. We're all at different places in our marriage, and sometimes that might be the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah. And so going back to this analogy of this building that was, in need of some repair, I think that another important thing to do is to really analyze the state of your marriage and to see, okay, is my marriage at a state where I can just kind of glean information from my parents or get some advice from my friends? Or is this where I need to call in the structural engineer? Do I need to call in the professional? Do we need to go and get some help? And one thing that I know a lot of couples run into is maybe the wife is really feeling like they need to go get help, but the husband isn't really there yet, and he's feeling like everything's fine. And so sometimes in a situation like that, a wife will feel like, oh, well, I can't go and get help because my husband doesn't want to. Well, I think that when you recognize that your marriage needs help, and if it's only you that realizes that, you can definitely still go and get help and seek counseling through a professional, like James said, through church leaders, if that's available to you. Or another way is even what we're doing right now, to listen to podcasts, to read books, to seek out information, and to learn things that you can do. Because at the end of the day, really, all change starts with an individual. Of course, you can hope that your spouse is going to change also, right? But it starts with you. And so in a marriage, you need both of you to be working on it. But definitely you can be the catalyst, and one person can be the thing that starts that change.
I totally agree with that. I think that that's so important to realize, especially if you're the spouse that feels like you're going it alone. You are empowered. You have so much power to make changes. And you know what? I know sometimes it doesn't always end up to where you're changing your spouse, because you can't change another individual. But I'm thinking back on our marriage and all the things, not even just relating specifically to marriage, but all the things that I see my wife do. I start to really get curious. That's how it's been for me anyway, and start to take an interest in it. I'll give you one example with like green smoothies. At first I totally mocked it, right? That's disgusting. and then, she did it and she kept it up, and it was like an example to me. And I was like, what's the benefits of this? And so I started doing like, adding the spinach in the drinks and so forth. And so I just think that is a direct result of me seeing my spouse sticking with something and doing something. Whatever it is you're practicing, I think can spill over onto your spouse.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then I also think that, when you are consistent, and so in marriage, if you are learning techniques, how to deal with situations, you're learning how to handle your emotions, how to express your emotions, all these things that you would learn through therapy, if that is something that you need, then you're going to be able to see more clearly what you need to do, and it'll just help the situation in general, even if your spouse isn't there yet. Now, best case scenario, your spouse is involved and on the same page and recognizes, that changes need to be made and that they want to work on it. And in this analogy, really, the contractors are the ones who put the plan into action, right, James? Mm-hmm. So the contractors are you and your spouse. It's the two of you are the contractors. You guys are the ones that are going to implement the plan. So you can get all these ideas from other places, from therapists and parents and podcasts and all the things we've talked about. But ultimately, it comes down to what you do in your home and what you guys decide how you're going to implement the information.
Right. I think that to me, and maybe that's because of what I do, I was going to say that to me is what is the fun part, the implementation. And hopefully you guys are doing the research together and you are building together.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can get all these tools and all these ideas from other people, but you can continue to get all this information, but unless you put it into practice, nothing is actually going to change. I remember I went to a conference once, and all these people were there at this conference, and a lot of them were like serial conference goers. They go from conference to conference to conference. And I was talking to some people. We sat together for lunch, and I was kind of asking them about other conferences they had been to, because this was maybe the first conference I had ever been to. Maybe I'd been to one a long time before, but anyway, I was wondering, like, wow, you go to all these conferences, so then what? Like, what is changing in your life because of it? And they really didn't have a great answer, just like, oh, yeah, that was a really good one, and this is a really good one, but nothing was changing.
I think I remember you saying that when you observed it, and when we talked about it, it was they're not changing because they're not implementing, right? Yeah. It's just like, I know I need help, and I've got to keep going to all this stuff. But it was the simple things that they needed to do that they just weren't. That's a big generalization, but I think that can be true. We can just seek out all this information, and then if you're not doing anything with it, it's not going to do you any good, obviously. I wanted to talk about the maintenance piece of this. And, this camp we went to, this lodge that we were looking at, it was in huge disrepair, and that's because it had undergone some years of huge neglect. So hopefully you're not at this point where your marriage is just gone, totally neglected for years and years. And you don't have to call in 2 structural engineers and all this help. And you might, and that's okay. You need to start from somewhere. But the maintenance part of it, your date nights, you're talking to one another, you're spending time together, you're touching, you're collaborating, you're building together. I think that's so important to not overlook. You've got to take the time to do the maintenance so that it doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, I love that idea of, really looking at where your marriage is, because it doesn't matter if you are in that crisis mode and what was that word you said earlier? The dormer's falling apart. whatever. If you're at that point, then recognize it. Call in the help. Get the support you need to get it to a stable, manageable point. But if you're just at a normal point, but you need a little maintenance, then recognize that too and put in the work. So a lot of times people say, oh, marriage is hard work. And I would say, I don't feel like marriage has to be hard work, but I do feel like marriage takes work. Marriage takes maintenance. It takes diligently, regularly putting effort in to your marriage. And when that doesn't get done, when that gets neglected, then these problems are going to kind of compile. So looking at what maintenance needs to be done to keep things up in your marriage.
I love that. And that's going to be individually tailored to you and your spouse. And again, that's coming from all of these support teams, or if you will, or areas of where you're going to recognize how to do this. And your maintenance plan is going to be different from anybody else's maintenance plan, but it's important to learn how to put that together. Going back to the lodge analogy, every year we'll go in and we'll do fire inspections, and we take a look at the glulam beams and make sure that we don't see any splitting. We go underneath and look at the structural footings and make sure that we don't see any cracks or any earth movement to where it would affect. This was on a hillside, so anything where there's going to be a landslide. So look at things that maybe have been issues in the past and figure out how you're going to maintain, if that makes sense.
Totally. I love it. And another thing to think about is just what we've talked about today. And so my question for this week is, who is on your support team? Who do you have that's supporting your marriage? Or maybe who do you need on that support team? Think about things that will help and strengthen and support and help you keep on maintaining, or maybe really coming in and redoing and remodeling your marriage, whatever it is that it needs. So let us know on Facebook and Instagram at Moms Who Know Podcast who is on your support team. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week on Moms Who Know.